Coming up, as the Brooklyn Nets continue their summer league journey, we take a look at Sean Marks and ask the question, with veterans like Cam Johnson and Dorian Finney-Smith still on the roster, is it time to stop anticipating more moves for Brooklyn before the upcoming season? We dive in on it all coming up next.
You are Locked On Nets, your daily Brooklyn Nets podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Yes, my friends, it is the Locked On Nets podcast right here on the Locked On Podcast Network. It's your team, the Brooklyn Nets, every single day. He's Doug Norrie. I'm Adam Warmbrick. We thank you, as always, for making us your first listen of the day. We're free on all those great platforms. And let you know today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Even though all those playoffs are done, you know that FanDuel's got you covered all summer long, hooking up all customers with a booster bonus daily. That's right. There's something for everyone every day, all summer long. Visit FanDuel.com to get started today. And Doug, while we work our way through Summer League, and we're obviously getting hyped about Killian Johnson and defending Dariq Whitehead and what his future is going to look like, the bigger question is, are the Brooklyn Nets done trying to shed some contracts ahead of the upcoming season? As we know, they are fully into the rebuild mode.
I mean, we had kind of warned against this a little bit ago, that we thought there was a possibility that the team was going to go into the season with the roster as is. And that's looking, every day that passes, for all you calendar bros out there, means this one day closer to the actual season starting.
That's right.
And we also know that transactionally stuff does kind of grind down here, right? Summer League ends. We're going to have the Olympics. I do think that, just in terms of the speed at which transactions and trades and free agency and all this stuff, it just slows down. This is just the nature of the calendar. So I think if I were to make a guess now, it wouldn't be too different than we guessed somewhat recently, which was that the Nets roster right now with specifically Cam Johnson, specifically Dorian Finney-Smith, guys that have been mentioned in trade rumors. I think those guys are going to go into the season on the team. Could be wrong. Happy to be wrong about that. Just because sometimes nothing happens, then it all happens. But that seems to be sort of the groundwork being laid by Sean Marks right now. Is that hey, the guys that you see on the roster now, kind of expect to see them opening night.
Yeah. And I think, too, as we're going to talk about some other things, just because the veterans aren't getting moved necessarily, some of the high-profile names, it doesn't mean there will be roster adjustments. Hearing that the Brooklyn Nets attended a Killian Hayes workout over the course of Summer League. So there's other things that could happen here in terms of taking flyers on guys that haven't worked out, that are still young, that maybe have some upside here. But when you talk about Cam Johnson and Dorian Finney-Smith specifically, and like you say, we've talked about this before, but the Cameron Johnson part of it, I can kind of get behind not being overly concerned about moving him. He has his injury concerns. They've kind of happened every single season. He's more of a 45 to 55 a game year kind of guy than he is a 65 to 75. But his age is right and his role is right. I do wonder about the Dorian Finney-Smith of this, because, and we're going to get into some quotes here too, but his age, even though his role is always going to be valuable, if we talk another half season to the trade deadline, it's probably fine. It's probably relative. But he's entered that territory now, going back to the second that he was traded for in the Kyrie Irving from Dallas deal, of, do the Nets ever really want to trade Dorian Finney-Smith? And I'm not even knocking it, but they've always set such a high threshold for what they want in return for him that he feels like the guy out of the two that I would say, hey, this may be trending towards just running out the contract going forward, as opposed to Cameron Johnson, who I think will still hold value here in the short and long term, and can hold value for this roster specifically when you have all these young players going into the season.
Yeah, I think that just in terms of DFS, my guess is there's just a delta between what they want and what other teams want to pay, which is that's not groundbreaking. That's not groundbreaking trade analysis. It's just, it takes two to tango when it comes to trades. I think that Sean Marks has probably held the line on wanting maybe even just one first, and that's just not in the appetite for some other teams, based on sort of what they are, assets available, sort of the seemingly increasing value of draft picks going forward. DFS's age at 31. He didn't even get a full season in last year. And it wasn't even he was sort of amazing at times either. And I just wonder if there's a gap. Now, the tricky part with him is that he, unlike Cameron Johnson, who is locked up here on what's by all account's just going to be a good contract here, like for a couple more years, right?
Mhm.
Between age and that money, like, decreasing this year and then being basically the same as it was last year into 26, 27. The DFS $15 million player option is like a little bit of a weird one. I want to guess that he picks it up right as it stands right now based on his age and stuff.
Mhm.
I'm not 100% sure about that because his archetype is needed in the league. I don't know if that throws teams off too. Is that like they're just, with the player option, and I'm not sure. So I think in the end, my guess is like with Sean Marks has happened in the past. Sometimes he's sold and gotten that extracted what seems to be the most ever value you could ever get for a guy, i.e.
Right.
Kevin Durant, i.e. Mikal Bridges. And there's been other times where it feels like he just held on just a bit too long and didn't get anything for the Joe Harrises and the Seth Currys, and kind of maybe sold a little low on Royce O'Neal and these like the role players. So it's almost like he gets the most out of the best guys and then isn't able to get anything out of the next the much lower tier. I mean, if I'm trying to sum it up, which is that's unscientific.
Yeah, but I think that, but hey, listen, if you're going to go one of two routes, go the route that he has gone. When it comes to trading off the critical assets, the highest leverage pieces, I hit home runs in terms of the Kevin Durant package, right? The Mikal Bridges package. Now we can talk about the Kyrie, and that's different, or we can talk also about the James Harden one. But
by the way, the thought process is actually the same for both.
yes.
It's just that one tier is just super highly valuable, and teams are willing to pay
Right.
a king's ransom. This next tier, same process. I want the most, but it's a tougher sell to everybody. It's a tougher sell to the front office. It's a tougher sell to fans. Like, we gave a first-round pick for Dorian Finney-Smith. Are you nuts? I mean, I can see another fan base saying that. And so it's just a tougher sell, where it's like, if it's Mikal Bridges, it's like, 5-6 first-round picks. Oh, if you're a Knicks fan, they loved it. So I don't know. It's same process, but just different. I can see why the attitudes would be different.
Oh, of course. And so with Dorian Finney-Smith, because I want to get into a couple quotes from Cam Johnson here in a second as well, and talk about maybe what his role could be for this team, even inside of a rebuild potentially. But specifically with Dorian Finney-Smith, it does feel like maybe it is the kind of thing where, listen, if we can't get the value that we want, the fan base may disagree with it. You may say it's bad business to not get value for a player, but there is the world where Sean Marks says, okay, if you don't want to give it to us right now before the season, fine. We'll wait until the trade deadline. You still don't want to give it to us at the deadline? Fine. We'll wait until the offseason. If he doesn't pick up the option, he goes to market, so be it. Like, because there are these worlds where it doesn't really impact now with all these picks and everything they have going forward and being in the rebuild. Okay, if Dorian Finney-Smith walked for nothing, well, that wouldn't be great, but I don't know if it damages our long-term future. And if he picks up the player option for $15 million, Sean Marks will turn around and say, yeah, and guess what? We need to have money on the books going into next season because we're going to have so much to get up to that cap floor. It's still going to benefit us, and we'll have the same discussion again next year, right? So it feels like there are always these slightly less advantageous but available avenues to go down when it comes to making these decisions. It isn't a pressure cooker specifically of, we're in the rebuild, you got to get these guys off the roster. There is time to continue to make these decisions. Let's come back in here and find out what was on the tip of Doug's tongue right there as we turn our attention over to Cameron Johnson, his contract, some of his quotes, and what it could mean for this team heading into the season. We'll get into that in just one moment.
All right, before we get into that, tell you about our friends over at eBay Motors. Passion, drive, patience, the formula for winning championship. It's also what keeps your ride or die alive. eBay Motors has everything you need to maintain your vehicle, level it up to peak performance. You got superchargers, you got exhaust kits, you got roof racks, you got LED headlights, so much more. Maybe you're into speed, power, or style. eBay Motors has you covered. With over 122 million parts for your number one ride or die, you'll always find exactly what you're looking for. With eBay Guaranteed Fit, your parts guaranteed to fit your ride every time, or your money back, because with eBay Motors, you're burning rubber, not cash, with all the parts you need at the prices you want. It's easy to make your car the MVP. Bring home those huge wins. Keep your ride or die alive at ebaymotors.com. Eligible items only. Exclusions apply. eBay Guaranteed Fit, only available to U.S. customers.
All right, as we continue today's Locked On Nets episode, we remind you that if you've been watching Fox Sports or ESPN on your TV all day long, you may have to be turning down that volume with all of that shouting. Oh, guys, make the switch over to Locked On Sports today. It's a free 24/7 sports streaming channel programmed for you every day to bring you the biggest stories without all the screaming. Locked On Sports today brings the can't-miss analysis, opinions, and news streaming 24/7 on YouTube or on the free Amazon Fire TV channels app, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, and you know it, it's your team. And it's every day, baby. So You can feel free if to agree or disagree on the Dorian Finney-Smith of it all, and if it is just okay for Sean Marks to say, I'm going to play the string out as long as it takes. But then there's the Cam Johnson. You already mentioned the contract is going to be favorable going forward, and even with the injuries, age and role and skill set, I just think are going to be valuable beyond this season if that's the case. And he fits into a different category in terms of what his role can be in the short term for Brooklyn.
Yeah, for sure. And just like to wind back to one other point, although it kind of goes into this as well. So we had said from the beginning that caution Nets fans said like the problem with trading these guys was also it's like, hey, you want draft picks, but they also have to send players. Like the salaries had to match, and that was always going to be a really hard, I thought, a hard sell for getting some of these guys traded. Was that specifically
easy
DFS.
Sell when it's Bogdanovich from the Knicks to move Mikal Bridges and get all these draft picks. Okay, hey,
exactly. It's like
right.
Some other team's gonna be like, hey, we're sending players and picks for Dorian Finney-Smith. Like what? That's the other problem because a little different for CJ, but and if you're a longtime listener to the podcast, you've heard us say this before. But for those that are new, when we went through the DFS potential trade packages, we had trouble finding packages for other teams, mostly because when you went to try to make the money work, it was like, that's just, they're going to want to send this player and some pick for Dorian Finney-Smith, which you have to do because so many of these teams were just in over the salary cap, so they weren't going to be able to take back trade exceptions and stuff. Like this was just a problem. So with Cam, I think that's the other issue that everyone just discounts immediately. They're just like, oh, why didn't you trade him? It's like, well, you have to send other things back, right? That's just the nature of it. You can't just give them away and get draft picks back. You got to get a player too. With Cam Johnson, he said all the right things so far, and good on him. He's in a spot that I'm sure he didn't think he was going to be. He signs a contract, he gets paid, so like no issue. He can't complain from that standpoint. Like they gave him probably top dollar when he re-signed that 3-year contract, right, for like $75 million. Yeah. I'm not sure any other team was giving him that in unrestricted free agency last season. But now he's left, his buddy leaves and goes across town. The team's going to stink. And now he's here. But by all accounts, like he's a consummate professional. He thinks about basketball a ton. I mean, if you listen to him, like Old Man on the 3 podcast, the guy just thinks about shooting a lot, right? He's like the right kind of guy. If you're going to tank, he's not like a needle mover that's going to win you tons of games, but for like professionalism and sort of like setting the right culture around young guys and stuff like that, it's not the worst thing to keep him around. I still would take first round picks back for him. No doubt about it. I'm just saying if we have to deal with the other side of this and have to make a case for why it's not the worst thing, there is like a small case around that to say he's probably still going to have value this season at the trade deadline, and starting off the season with a real professional on the team that's at least going to try hard and like set the right tone. You can do worse in tanking situations.
Yeah, when asked, taking just a small clip of it, if I'm staying in Brooklyn, then I'm all in, excited to play, excited to grow this group, and that's where my head is at right now. There's other things in there about working in the offseason, working on his game, etc. And I think you're right. Listen, it doesn't mean that it's our number one option for what we want the Nets front office to do or what we think they should do. But, and we'll talk about later this offseason, some of the projections around win totals that have come out for the NBA. Guess what? The Nets aren't high on the list. They're closer to the bottom. We'll get into it.
At the bottom by a lot.
Okay, Doug. Yes, they're at the absolute bottom of the list. Wow, great. Way to blow the tease for later for a future episode. No, but we are going to talk about that and what it means. And by the way, that's based on still having the roster that they currently have. So I agree with you. When you go into a season, listen, we want Cam Thomas to take the next leap. We believe in Noah Clowney's development. Nicholas Claxton has been here. He's going to be a core piece, at least in the short term, for this team. We get that. But there's a lot of young guys, and it doesn't hurt to have veteran experienced players that even if their roles are not as large as you once anticipated them being for this team, when some of these young players go through struggles, when some of your outside shooters like a Jalen Wilson loses his stroke from the perimeter, as we saw him go through in his rookie season, it probably doesn't hurt to have a guy that's done a lot of three-point shooting in his career to help him, to work on him, right? A little bit of these like player coach kind of things, having those in place can be helpful for a young player. So while I would say if I can get the picks and move on from him, of course, great, grand, wonderful. I don't have any issue if we go into this regular season and Cameron Johnson is viewed as one of the, quote, elder statesmen of the roster, helping some of these young guys learn how to be pros over the course of this season. And then we're right back there at the trade deadline having these conversations and seeing where the landscape of the NBA looks.
Yeah, and I think like again with this $20 million and the way that the salary the salary cap and stuff is just set up, like we are in a place where like that's just going to still be very tradable. And I think the difference between him, let's say, and DFS, like at the trade deadline, is I think there's teams that will bring him on and be like, hey, at worst, this guy will be the sixth guy off the bench, like sixth man off the bench or seventh guy. Like he'll be like, or and there's some chance with a decent season, like they can envision him as a starter. And I think that like that begins to soften the blow around, or like it begins to make it so that like there's going to be probably hopefully a market. There's risk here. He's an injury risk guy. Like he's had a lot of injuries. DFS is like getting older. Like there's risk. These guys just get injured and you're left in the Joe Harris situation. It was like, hey, we wanted to trade you, but the guy had foot surgery and now we just can't trade you. Right. Or like Seth Curry just gets hurt at the trade deadline. And it's like, in and around the trade deadline, it's like, we just can't trade for injured players. And so that is for sure a risk. Everyone's healthy now. It's easier to trade now because they're healthy. But I don't know. But the Nets are just kind of in a tricky. It's a bit of a tricky spot. And like you said before, it's not like people that take actual money on this stuff have any concerns about this stuff. The Nets have the lowest win total easily. Like one of the lowest projected win totals in the last many years at 20.5. It's not, our friends over at FanDuel don't have it yet, but it's floating around the ether other places. That's where it's going to land for them too. I'm pretty sure.
And that's with
I said 20.5. I said, sorry, 20.5 is what I had predicted. It was 19. It was 19.5.
You look at the upcoming season, you think 20.5, Doug, was a reasonable number? No, 19.5.
Insanely low. Yes. And that's with like the assumption that these guys could be on the roster, which is basically to say they're not needle movers. It's not going to matter. It's not going to matter. They're not going to win games for you. This roster is horrible. It's easily the least talented roster in the NBA. Not close to me. I don't think it's close at all. Actually, I think the Nets right now, as it stands, if they made no moves, they would rank as the least talented by probably a lot. And so
right now they're filled with young talent or veteran role players effectively. Like there isn't even veteran player who's been established as X, right? And, okay, he's not, the Bradley Beals of the world we talk about it years ago with the Wizards and stuff. Well, you still have this player X on there. Why? The Nets don't have that. I mean, Cam Thomas, we know, could be a guy that emerges.
By the way,
but
even if he made the leap,
if
he made some kind of insane leap, I would still say it. Like, even if he like 1.5x his like highest possible outcome, which I actually really don't even know if it's possible, but let's just say he did, I would still say they were the worst. So there's just no risk here. There's just no risk here of these guys being on the team. The risk is that you devalue the asset and you don't have picks going forward. You don't get the picks going forward and you lose them for nothing. I don't think that's a huge risk, but it's still very much there.
The other thing that's going on then, if we believe that Sean Marks is under no pressure to move these veterans right now, it doesn't mean that there couldn't be roster moves in bringing in more young players to get an opportunity maybe to reclimate their careers. Hey, enter one Killian Hayes. Workouts, Sean Marks attending. We dive into whether or not this is a, quote, low-risk, high-value buy that the Nets should be interested in to close out today's Locked On Nets episode in just one moment.
All right, before we get to that, tell you about our friends over at FanDuel. Look, you love sports. We love sports. Everyone loves sports. You love them so much. You never want them to stop, but the NBA is not really going on except for Summer League right now. There's fewer games. That's all right. FanDuel's got you covered all summer long. They keep the sports going basically all the time. Right now, FanDuel's hooking up all customers with a booster bonus daily. There's something for everyone every day, all summer long. If you're over on FanDuel, get a little all-star game action. Paul Skeens versus Corbin Burns. I mean, National League -1.5 right now with Skeens on the mound makes sense, except that you get the money line at +100. Don't mind that. Total ace going there. You can also get on some to hit a home run parlay builders. Maybe you think like an Ohtani plus Aaron Judge kind of thing you want it to put together. Just some of what you can do over on FanDuel. Look, FanDuel's got you covered all summer long. Head on over to FanDuel.com. Start making the most out of your summer. FanDuel, official sports betting partner of Major League Baseball.
All right, as we tie a pretty little bow on today's Locked On Nets episode, remind you, get us on YouTube, get us on the podcast feed, get us over on X at Doug Norrie, at Adam Armbrecht, at Locked On Nets. And guys, listen, just Doug knows that he's follically challenged. You don't have to come after him in the comments. That's just a little PSA. All right, he gets it. We all get it. And in spite of that debilitating injury to his head, He shows up every single day and he does
It's
the
the
show
brains
anyway.
pushing the hair. It's the brains
That's all
pushing the
that
hair
is.
out. Sorry.
There's so
Yeah,
much
like-
knowledge he couldn't afford. We're talking about max capacity, which, by the way, is why he has to be very careful entering doorways or any low kind of, hanging items, because there's a lot of brain power.
Huge head plus no hair just means,
Very
means
dangerous.
absolute
Also-
genius status.
People
Sorry.
might not know this because of the hair on my head, or maybe they do. I shouldn't insult the intelligence of the audience. They see my head next to your head. There's a big head going on over here, but just less brains. So I got to keep the hair on top. Anyway, we talk about the Nets, the summer league of it all, and then the report that comes out that Killian Hayes, come on, guy, he's trying to stir the pot. He wants to get back in the mix here. And the Nets, Sean Marks, attend the workout to see just what's the state of his game. And as we all know, when last let go by the Detroit Pistons, I would say, much like Doug may be follically challenged, Killian Hayes was offensively challenged at times. But I find it interesting, the reaction to this, because I think there's the perception angle of it from a Nets fan base or any fan base where you're like, well, if this guy couldn't make it on the Detroit Pistons when they were an absolute dumpster fire, why would any team want them? I go the other way. I say, why not? Like, why not take a flyer on this guy? Why not bring in a player that you could say, listen, if we can develop and work on your offensive game to any level of success, there is value to what you can do on the court. If it doesn't work out, it cost us, guess what? Checks the tape. Absolutely nothing. It costs you nothing to bring in players that are perceived to no longer have NBA viability. And if it ends up hitting, you maybe found a player that just fills in your rotation for the short term, that is here for a couple of seasons and is still young enough that you could find upside in him.
Yeah, look, like, obviously a total draft bust.
Yeah.
It's that's like goes without saying. He went 7th in that draft. He was like, some high profile people really liked him, had him actually higher than 7th. He was like a pretty divisive, polarizing guy at the draft. Like, there were some that really thought it was going to translate in a huge way, and then there were some that thought it was going to kind of play out like it did, which is that he can't shoot at all. And it's like, and if you can't do that from like a lead ball position, it goes bad real quick. There's been no sign that the shooting is going to turn itself around. I mean, the free throw percentage all over the place. He actually didn't really even generate a lot of free throws because he doesn't get to the rim tons. Like, he's just not a good player. Now you want to say, well, the Nets are in a position where taking, 23, 24-year-old post-hype guys that had pedigree at some point, and like you said, the worst case scenario is that they, tank command you a little bit more while you just see if it works out. The Nets are in a position that's like, why not? There's no downside for them. It's like, he makes the team worse. Okay, that's not the worst thing. Oh, he makes the team a little better, but it's because he rapidly improves on areas that he is really challenged in. Well, that's a win too. So I don't think it's likely that they do this, but in the any news is some news thing at this point, them taking a look at him is at least the correct mindset. I think I will say it's pretty hard for a guy to get picked in the high lottery, 7th overall, and to be out of the league in 4 years.
Yeah,
is rough. That doesn't happen very often, right? And so you want to say it's a Pistons problem, you want to say it's a Killian Hayes problem. I'm not really sure. It represents the kinds of moves the Nets should make, probably.
Yeah.
But there's a reason he's out of the league here as a young player. It's because it's just like there's no tape that shows you, outside of the defensive stuff, which is kind of there, that like he can kind of translate it at this point.
There was a really good, and I'll try to get this and put in the show notes on a future episode. They were talking about, it's like, what do you need to do as a young player at summer league? And basically it was like, show up, listen to the coaches, run the drills, try hard on defense. Don't make waves. It was like all these tenets of just like, come in, do your job, fill the role, and give yourself an opportunity to be successful. And so when you bring up, it's, when a young player like Killian Hayes, who obviously has all kinds of problems in his game, but when he isn't getting second and third chances, because look around the league, young guys usually find ways to just hang around for a lot longer because, hey, maybe they'll turn it around. Maybe we can get there. I think there is some perception around, boy, I hate to tie it to a non-shooter, where it's like, the cognitive dissonance that we feel like sometimes Ben Simmons has when he talks about the state of his game and where he's at and what I'm going to be and what I'm capable of versus, but there's like real flaws and you've had a lot of injuries and we don't know if you're going to be good again or at that level again. Same thing with Killian Hayes, where it's kind of like, listen, man, the tape tells it. The stat lines tell you you're a really bad shooter. Your offensive game is a mess. But if you came in, excuse me, and get humbled by the idea of like, I need to do everything humanly possible to improve these areas of my game. So I wonder if there is that part of it, because usually a young talent, a high lottery pick, he'll still stick around in the league for a few more years. He effectively has been out of it and is now trying to claw his way back in. So I wonder if maybe that shift helps move the needle. Hey, if you come in the door saying like, my shot's broken, I need help. Maybe a team, if it's not the Nets, somebody takes a flyer and you say, okay, it looks like he finally gets it. He does need to take a long-term approach to fixing his mechanics and becoming a sound NBA player.
And by the way, just going back to summer leagues, I look real quick, and we're gonna probably get out of here in a second. But we talked about how at summer league, like high profile like guards really need to pop at summer league to show that you can like start handling it. And when I looked back real quick to Killian Hayes' summer league, which is by the way his summer league, which after his second season in the league. Oh no, sorry, it was before. That was this. Well, it doesn't matter. I'm pretty sure it was the second season. It doesn't really matter because. So he played 3 games, 28 minutes a game, 6 points a game. Like that's alarming for for a guard. For a guard. Now maybe he's off ball a little bit because Cade played summer league that year and they had Saban Lee and Cade was like 19 points. But if you're a guard at summer league and you played 28 minutes a game and you scored 6 points a game on 31% shooting, like I'm sure the Pistons, even at that point, were like, oh no. No, because if those are your numbers, in that environment as a guard, that is, and there's no injury concerns or anything like that.
Right.
That's alarmingly bad. It's alarmingly bad. And so I get why fans would see the Killian Hayes name and be like, oh, high draft pick. And we're usually like this, by the way. It's like, oh, high draft pick.
Right.
Isaac Okoro. We did a whole episode about Isaac Okoro, for God's sake. So it's not like we're not prone to talking like this. It's just that he's got so many red flags that it's really hard to see it it's like hard to see it happening. That makes sense. These summer like this actually was probably the death knell for me. These summer league numbers. And by the way, I'm counting all the NBA numbers, which also aren't good. But when you can't dominate guys who are like 2 levels below you, you're in real trouble, I would say, going forward.
Yeah, and I wonder if maybe Killian Hayes just should have been taking a flyer and showing up and getting on a roster for summer league and trying to show it, right? When you're hosting private workouts, you're maybe still feathering the line of where you think you've been, where you were drafted, and what you're deserving of versus, hey, man, everybody's fighting for jobs, including a guy like Keon Johnson, who is lighting the G League, a summer league on fire right now and making a case for himself to have an NBA role. So, yeah, we'll see how it shakes out. But ultimately, the big takeaway is this is what the Nets should be doing, looking at all these young guys, all these projects, taking flyers, and maybe one of them hits. This is exactly the process they did last year. Should be doing it even more so this offseason.
Oh, buddy, couldn't have said it better myself. I usually do say it better myself, but in this case, I'm just going to say it right now, couldn't have said it better myself. We're going to get out of here. That's summer league 4:30 here against the Knicks. We'll finally figure out who won the Mikal Bridges trade, the Nets of the Knicks. We'll find out at summer league 4:30 p.m. in Vegas. We'll know for sure. That will be settled. In the meantime, make sure you subscribe to Locked On Nets. Leave a comment too. It can be mean too. I don't care. You can't offend me. It's almost impossible. Adam knows this. There's probably a couple ways.
I try, guys. I try every day. As soon as the podcast ends, bam, I'm peppering them with insults, and they don't land. They don't land.
He just laughs. Make sure you subscribe to Locked On Nets over YouTube. Subscribe wherever you listen to podcasts.
In the middle of every difficulty lies opportunity, and that, Doug, was one Joanna Gaines.
Oh, I have no idea who that is. Well,
What is it? Chip and Joanna, fixer upper. This couple. We're regarded.
God, I have no idea what you're talking about. Is that a show?
No, calm down, Doug. People often refer to myself and Doug as the Chip and Joanna Gaines of podcasting. So you really got to brush up on this, buddy, because people are paying us compliments and you're missing out.
You said I've just literally never even heard these names before. And I'm not like some weird. Is that a television show or is it like a social media thing? What is it?
It's a somewhat popular restoration, home renovation show. They're kind of a power.
Chip and Joanna splitting up is the first thing I read on Google. We'll find out. We're going to find out here in a second.
That's not true. It was vicious rumors, lies and slander. Get us out of here. I can't even hear it.
Well, this goes without saying. One of the all-time great poets. We'll be back again tomorrow talking more Brooklyn Nets basketball. Basketball. Yeah.